Hello everyone, today we'll be doing another portrait. Today's portrait is going to focus on dramatic lighting. So when you see this face here, there is quite a strong and harsh light. And you can tell because of the harsh shadows and also the direct light that's coming in from this side. So we're going to get our supplies. Just need your pencil and eraser. You might also need a sharpener because we will be shading a lot. Another thing you might want to get is if you have charcoal pencils or charcoal stick, you can use that for the shading as well, but it is up to you. So let's get started. I will begin by first sketching the general outline and the shapes of this face here. So I can see that the skull is round here, and then you just want to start marking out the construction lines. And try to make your drawing big this time because we want to really showcase those dramatic shadows. So now I just drew a line to show the center of the face. So imagine this is the face, or the circle I just drew, and now I've drawn that line essentially. And then you're also going to do the line showing where the chin is going to be, as well as the line for the eyes, which is usually, the center of the whole face. Okay, so I'm gonna put it pretty down here. And then here's the bottom of the chin. All right, and when you're done with that, we're going to start marking the main features on the face. So if you were here for the previous classes, you'll know that I usually start with the eye sockets. So remember, I put it in the wrong place. Wherever the line that I drew for the eye is going to be where the eye is going to be, obviously. So the eye sockets will sit right on top of that line. So I'm just drawing the curve of the eye socket. So essentially, what shape are the eyes feeling like? So again, it's not a good time yet to focus on the details. Today we will add a little bit of detail, so sketch lightly right now. But let's not focus too much on the details until we have established the main components of the face. Now let's do the eyebrows. The eyebrows sit comfortably above the eye socket, so you can almost put them right on top. And notice how this one is quite angular. It connects with the corner of the eye and all the way up. So the corner of the eyebrow, the arch, you can call it, sits there. And you can think of this combined shape as a trapezoid. So that's a trapezoid. It's just an angled rectangle. So from the eye socket, we extend those two corners upwards and to the right to find where the eyebrows will be. Upwards and to the right. Okay, and then we have what is called I forgot what this is, but there's an area between the eyebrows. For this one, it's quite small, so it won't be too much of a distance between the eyebrows. In fact, it's quite close. Especially at this angle, right? Because once again, if I pull out the face, you can see that eyebrows, they might be further when you see them from up front. right? The distance looks like this. But due to perspective, as the head turns, you'll see that they become the visual distance between these two eyebrows becomes shorter and shorter. All right, because the thing in the distance shortens, and then so does this area. So everything's moving towards the center line, which we have drawn earlier. All right, so just draw your eyebrows, and then next we're going to move on to the nose. Let's start by carving out the top of the nose bridge. So you can't really see it well on this picture here, but if I zoom in, you can kind of maybe see that it's like a circular dip. So this is the nose bridge, and then now it's smoothing and connecting actually with the eyebrow. So we can use the eyebrow as a starting point. And in fact, the eyebrow will have to connect to the nose. So anatomically, it also makes sense. When we're drawing it, make sure that we also mimic that as well. Now, where does the nose stop? I've drawn the top of the nose, right? I've drawn the top of the nose bridge, but I'm not sure where exactly I want the nose to stop. And this is always a part that I struggled with when I was learning portraiture. Either I make it too high up or too low. Okay, if we're looking at our picture or our reference lines, we always want to match it in perspective or in relativity to what we've already marked on the page. So if this is the distance between the eye and the chin, the nose seems to be almost perfectly in the center of that line. So if I drew an imaginary line from the top of the nose, right, top of the nose, all the way down to the bottom of the chin, and if we divide it by half, that just happens to be where the nose ends. So we can even use this as a reference point. So using the top of the nose, bringing it down. I think I'm going to make my chin a little bit longer, just for myself. I don't know what your drawings look like, but you got to see for yourself, right? If your chin is already pretty low, don't make it even lower. Just get a general feel for how balanced a face you want, or how you want to balance the face, sorry. Okay, so once again, I'm going to take an imaginary line, draw it down to the chin, and then find that middle. And this is going to be where my nose ends. And this is the side of the nose, remember, because we're looking at it from the side. Another thing to note is how wide is the nose. If we look at the corner of the eye, and if we did a line going straight down, it just so perfectly hits the edge of that nose there. So almost a rule of thumb every time when you're drawing a portrait, the edge of the nose will almost always line up with the inner corner of the eye. The inner corner, not the outer, the inner corner. And this depends on the person too. So if you have a particularly wide nose, this rule is not going to work for you. Or if you have a really thin nose, this rule might not work for you as well. It just depends on the different face shapes. Okay, so now I've drawn the side of the nose, right? And then I'm going to just lightly sketch where the other edge of the nose is going to be. The reason why I'm lightly just guessing, I'm just guessing where the edge of that nose is, because in this photograph, it is really hard to see where the nose ends. But that is one of the hidden joys of a dramatic portrait or dramatic lighting portrait, because you can almost just pretend things exist and then shade it in, and the eye will naturally fill in the blanks. So although this is a huge chunk of just darkness, our brains can piece together the parts of the face. So we, in fact, see a face, as opposed to just seeing a shadow. Okay, draw the nose, and this one is kind of tipped up, so that's why I've had the nostril end go upwards a little bit. And then see this shape, it's almost like a little boop, and it goes, wraps around the tip of the nose. I'm also going to put that there. Everything here is shaded, so you can also shade that in right now as we are drawing the nose. Okay, at this point, please just keep your pencil marks pretty light, so you can come back and erase these. The next step that I'm going to do before I do the mouth is going to be the ears, actually. So the ears sit on the far left of the face. It's not even on the face. It's just on the side of the head. So if we drew a line to show this jaw area, we can possibly find where the ear starts. First, let's also find the horizon, or the x-axis that it's sitting on, or the y-axis. If you took a line and drew it straight across, if you took a line and drew straight across, where does it hit? Okay, so I can see that this ear is a little bit higher than the eye, but it sits at where the nose begins, or where the eyebrows end. So that's the top of my ear. And then the bottom of the ear will come just about here. So now we have the height determined. Now we need to know where left and right it is. So looking at our face, you can take this area, so the drawn area from the far corner of the eye to the far right corner of the face, the edge of the face. And I'm just picking a random amount of stuff that I've drawn already, and then comparing it, the distance, to this. So it's about this distance times 2 and a little less. So I'm going to take this, measure it, and then flip this point over. And that's roughly where the top of the ear starts. And then once again, it has a slant. It's tilted. So the ear goes like this. And it's a little bit, it's actually about the same width as the nose going down. So what I just did now is actually just draw the inside of the ear. I just sketched it. So if we want to focus on the ear, before we get to the other parts, let's zoom in a little bit. So the ear, first we have a top lobe, so the outer lobe. Let's think of them in like bridges. So first we have, sorry, just a second. We have the outer lobe, which is this whole area, right? The thing, the flesh and skin that wraps around the whole of the ear. That's one section. And then now we have an interesting section, the inner lobe, or inner curve or bridge is what I call it. It's kind of like there's a Y shape at the top. You see that Y? So everything that I'm coloring white, it sticks out, and this area goes in. Let's see if I can do this in different colors so you can see it a little bit better. So let's do pink for the outside. So this is the outside lobe. Let's do green for the inside. Lobe. And then blue for this, which essentially is just the skin of the face or the head coming in contact. And then it, there's also that tiny little bump in the middle. This is not a ridge, it's just a raised surface. And every ear will be different. But what you actually want to focus on is not too much of the shapes, but actually the shadows. So if I get rid of these all, you see these shadows? They're mostly on the top and there's a huge one in the middle. If you can somehow just guesstimate or sketch that randomly on there, your ear will look like an ear. And it's not like everybody's looking at the ear when you're drawing. But if you do want to know how to draw an ear, just look at the anatomy. Okay, something like that. Anyways, let's go back to the full face. Let's do the mouth next. So the mouth, if you want to know where it is, it's halfway between the bottom of the nose, or the tip of the nose, to the bottom of the chin. So I drew a line starting at the bottom of the nose, down to the bottom of the chin. The mouth will be somewhere in the middle. And then draw the top, the dip, or the Cupid's bow, just to show the top of the lips. And then also maybe somewhere, just guessing, for the bottom of the lip. And they're both the same height or thickness, the top and bottom lips. But usually the bottom part is a little bit thicker. But that depends on the person. Okay, now how wide is the mouth? We just figured out the top and the bottom, but now how far left and right? That's right. So if you were guessing using the eye to measure, that's right. So I would take imaginary line, draw from the corner of the mouth of the photo, or imagine it starting somewhere in the middle of the eye. So not the corner, but somewhere in this area. So the corner of the mouth, let's do it around here. That's where the corner of the mouth is going to be. Okay, and then one thing to note is that the further, let's say I drew the corner of the mouth all the way over here. This feels more like a pulled smile, but this person's mouth is really relaxed. So if you've ever noticed, the wider you draw your mouth, the more tense or exaggerated that expression is going to be. But if you bring it a little bit closer, the more neutral it is going to be. But if you push it out all the way to this edge, it'll feel like a pucker, like there's tension pulling it in. So it's another one of those things where you want to find the perfect balance. Too wide will exaggerate a stretch, and too close or too thin to the edge will give you an exaggerated pull or squash. And you want somewhere right between the middle. So that's why the corner of the mouth will be somewhere here for me, because I see and I feel that this is a very neutral expression. Okay, for this one, now we're going to draw the silhouette of the face. So what that is, I'm going to draw the edge of the face, paying close attention to where things jump out, where they go in, and where they curve out again. So I'm going to start on the forehead. The forehead goes in from the eyebrows. So I already know that my eyebrows first curve in a little bit, and then we have a little bump just on the edge there, and then it recedes into the hairline. We're not sure where it quite ends yet, but we'll come back and figure that out when we draw the hair. So sketch out the silhouette of the forehead, the edge of the forehead. If you see me using this thing, this is a brush, it's an ink brush, but you can use it when dry to just dust away all the little eraser bits. You can also use any other paintbrush, but the longer the bristles, the better, because it's softer and it doesn't smudge. If you're using like these kinds of paintbrushes, it won't work so well. They still brush away though, but you do have to do a little bit more work. And it doesn't catch as much. So find a big, soft, and long hairbrush or paintbrush that'll help you dust away. Alright, and what's next will be the silhouette of the lower half of the face below the eyebrows. So what we see here is this eyebrow, the brow ridge, is that what we call it? Yeah, the brow ridge. It's poking out. And then it goes back in to wrap around the eye. So it goes back in a little bit, but not too much. Then now we have the cheekbones. And notice the cheekbones, it tapers to meet the nose. So it's not the same angle as the nose. It's not the same, right? It goes in a little bit more. So the top distance will be wider than the bottom distance. And then you're going to pull that cheekbone back in, right? There's a little bit of that flesh poking out around the mouth area. So make sure you draw that as well. Just very, very subtle. It's not like a bulge. It's more just like the line stopped curving in the same direction just for a little bit. Yeah, see what I did there? It kind of just made it look like he was chewing something, but he's not. Just very, very subtle bump. Like it's not even there, but it looks like it's there. And then come down to meet the chin. This chin is quite small and short, so there's not too much of a length that we need to calculate. Okay, and then we're going to draw the bottom of the jaw here, connecting up to the ear. And because it's quite a soft shadow, I mean by that, like it's dark, but it's not a sharp shadow, so there's no definite line for me to look at. I'm still going to just guesstimate where that bone is. So looking like in the middle of the shadow, where the shadow's darkest, is going to be the placement for the jaw. something like that. So we're now going to move on to the neckline, the back of the neck, which connects with the head. So this part is actually quite important. I see a lot of people doing their necks too wide or too skinny. And then here's a general rule of thumb. You don't want it looking like a skeleton or too much like a cartoon. Like, this is not anatomically correct, especially with the way that he is holding his posture. So let's look at this photo for a bit. Notice how he's kind of slouching, but not exactly. There's a curve in the neck, and it starts where the head ends, and that line is actually almost at the edge of that ear. So you don't want the neck to be starting like the edge of the neck. You don't want it to be starting here, because now you're completely missing the spine, right? The spine would actually be there. So if you're drawing that line, you're just drawing the spine bone, not all this flesh and the skin that's wrapped around it. So move this more to the outside. The neck is thicker than you think it is. And it's actually not that long either. Most people have pretty not long necks. So if you start here, this usually ends just a little bit below the chin. So if I drew a line across, yeah, my neck will end a little bit below the chin. I'm just drawing the neckline. I'd probably make the bottom a little bit more sticking out like that, just to show like the back muscles that are coming and reaching up a little bit and connecting with the neck. And in this photo, this person, their skin wraps around the trapezes, I think this is, like this muscle group here. So the neck is actually wrapping around that, and we see this shadow happening. So what I like to do is just add a few hatch marks, just like so, to indicate that shadow to show the skin twisting and then folding over itself, kind of like how fabric does. So even you could do like just a couple lines, like 4 or 5 lines, to show that the skin is moving there. Okay, and then now let's move to the bottom of the neck, or the inside of the neck now. It starts around the corner of my mouth. This is interesting because I didn't expect it to be quite thin, but it starts here, so give yourself a little bit of that room. And then for this person, there's an Adam's apple, which is just this thing that sticks out. So capture that as well. It's just a little bump. And then it's almost like a straight line connecting down into the clothes. So I just added that extra shadow out here. Okay. And then I'm going to roughly sketch in the collar and then the clothes, just so it doesn't feel like I'm drawing a floating head. And this is just something I do. You don't have to do it right now. If you want to leave it blank, you can also leave it blank. Alright, now let's draw the eyes. So let's finally put them in there. For the eyes, always focus on a couple things. Number one, the curve of the eyelids. Number two, the corners of the eye, so the far corners where the eyelids meet. And of course, where the iris is. So I'm just going to put down a couple of little dots or placeholders to show where I want the corners of the eyes to be. So let's say here, and that comparing to the eyebrow is a little bit to the right. I mean, compared to the far corner of the eyebrow where it ends, it's a bit shorter than the eyebrow. So let's put it somewhere on the line here. Okay, and then the inside corner of the eye is also going to be slanted inwards. Let's put it there. I've just made it 2 dots on my drawing. And now you're going to connect these 2 dots with a curve to show the eyelid. When it's tilting sideways, you can almost always be certain that the eyelid will tilt from this sort of angle when looking forwards into this sort of angle. So wherever the head turns, that emphasis curve, like the climax of that curve or the highest point of that curve, will also shift and follow with the turning direction of the face. So that my curve will kind of look like this. Once again, I'm drawing the inside of the eye, and I'm not drawing the upper line here. I'm drawing the lower line where the eyeball starts. Okay, and then now draw the bottom of the eye. Bottom of the eye is less curved, I would say, than the top one. So it's quite flat. However, there is still a curve. It is still round. Okay, and connect those 2 corners. Then you're going to draw the upper corner or the upper eyelid. And we'll shade everything else in later, but you can start adding a little bit of those shadows right now if you feel like. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit because it's starting to look a little bit more like a black eye as opposed to an eyelid. That happens when your lines are too thick. So remember to sharpen your pencils. Okay, and before we shade actually any of it, oh, sorry, don't forget the iris. So this person's actually looking at us. So make sure that you lightly sketch in the iris here. I'm feeling like the bottom of the eyelid should be a little bit higher. Mine's looking a little too cartoony, which is okay, but I wanted this to look a little bit more realistic. So I'm just bringing that eyelid up. And because of the way this photograph is, you don't need to draw the other eye at all because we're actually just going to shade it in. The only really thing that you could possibly add are the eyelashes poking out from the side of the face. So you can't see, there they are. But that's an after step. So we gotta shade all of this first. After we've drawn everything else, once we shade it, then we add the little details to show where the hidden features are. So I just kind of leave that all blank. Okay, and then now the final thing before we start shading everything is to draw in the hair. So once again, I start with the hairline. So where the hair starts. There's a little bit of that. The starting of the hair, so whenever you're drawing hair, at the edges you can mimic the hair growth with your pencil. The forehead is quite tall. It's about the same height as the distance from the eyebrow to the nose, so look at this. It's about the same. Actually a little bit shorter. Yeah, so I would make this forehead a little bit shorter than this. And boop. Okay, so draw a little line. I'm just going to connect this over softly. And for this kind of hair, we just also want to focus on the general block rather than the tiny little details. It's good that this hair is dark today because then it hides a lot of those details from us. And it forces us to think more of the larger area of the hair. I'm going to lightly erase my construction circle just so I can focus on the shape of the hair and that it won't distract me from it looking like, you know, baldness or like a hat. Okay, starting from the outer corners, we do have some wispy bits. So those are those little flyaways that kind of go in the opposite direction. You can just 3 or 4 lines for each of these little strands, no more, because if you start to add a lot more lines, it starts to look fuzzy. So now you have fur instead of hair. So follow the hair growth when you're drawing the outline of the hair. It juts out a little bit here, and remember the back of the head will connect with the neck. So imagine an imaginary line coming up from the neck and stemming up towards the back of the head. And that's where the hair will also be. So now I just drawn a couple lines showing the side of the hair where it's buzz cut, like it's very short, and then the top of the hair is a little bit more thick and there's more density. So the lines will flow a little bit differently up top. It's all part of the hairstyle. I'm just going to erase now some of these construction lines, because now we'll begin to shade, I believe. So just lightly, you don't need to be too exact, because we will just shade over most parts anyways. And be careful and take your time when you're erasing, because you don't want to accidentally erase something that you wanted to keep. I'm going to start with the top and work my way down. So because I'm right-handed, it is easier for me to go from top left to the bottom right, so I can avoid, you know, little smudge marks like this. But it's not a huge issue. You can start wherever you want. And I'll probably move around the page as well. So when you're shading, just pay attention to mostly all the darkest tones. Everything here on this page that is black or a very dark color, you can shade that in. And if you want to use charcoal, you may do that as well. Back to when you're shading and blocking in a huge or big amounts of space at a time, you can use a color. So if you have any pencil crayons, oil pastels, feel free to use them as well. I am using pencil. I'm just working my way down the hairline, filling in one area at a time, but still paying attention, right, to the rest of the drawing. You don't want to be focused too much on one part. It is good to focus, but always pull back. Maybe even stand up and get back, look at your drawing for a little bit. So you can spot any major mistakes before it is too late. At this point, you can even take a photo of your work in progress, right? Take a photo and then put it up and then look at it, because sometimes our drawings will look very different on our phones or tablets and digital devices as opposed to when we're looking at them in real life. So all the side of the head, nothing too much to see, just a little bit of texture of the cut hair. Now we're going to move to the top. There's also not a lot of definition up on the top. It's mostly just one chunk of black. But you can keep, like, say, like, you can see these tiny highlights. These tiny little highlights. Almost like a brown. You can keep those, but honestly, I would just shade all of it. If you want to keep the highlights, however, I do recommend like lightly sketching out where those highlights are going to be. Just like kind of like outlining a highlight, right? So I've just shaded around the boundary of that where the highlight is. Shaded around it. Now I shade everything else on the outside of that, of what I've just outlined. Maybe going in a little bit, mixing and blending. And then I skip past this part and then go on to the right side. Right, so now it looks like you have a very natural highlight up here at the top. If you don't want it, if you think it's too bright, just go across it with a couple lines. See, I'm just cutting across it with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a couple different lines that are going in different directions. See, I'm drawing an S shape, or like I'm moving my pencil to mimic the flow of different hair strands. And then blending that out so it looks more natural. Okay, and then now I'm going to work my way to the front of the hair. It's really hard to see what the hair is like, but I'm assuming it's kind of like a pushed back, slicked back hairdo. So that's why I'm doing these C curves for the front of the hair. I'm just having random bits and pieces of hair fly upwards and away in different directions. So curve up, curve left, curve down, curve right. So you don't want all of them to be like going in this direction, right? Have some going down to show variation in how the hair grows. Okay, and then I'm going to shade the side of the face. Actually, you know what? I'm going to shade the left side or the bottom of the hair, just so I complete that section. And then since we're here in the area anyways, I'm going to add the shadow of the ear. And it's just like a little boat scooping underneath the ear. And it is quite dark. Now back to the right side of the face. I'm going to start at the top and then work my way down. So another technique is if you squint. So squeeze your eyes. So not that they're closed, but so you start to blur the image. If you squint your eyes just barely or a little bit more, you can, or take off your glasses, you can see, well, you can't see anymore, but the shapes will become blurred. And that makes it easier for us actually to find where the shadows are, because our brain is too occupied with not looking at details. We have more time and space to look at the shadows. So here we have a little furrow mark. That's just like a wrinkle, because maybe he's raising his eyebrows a little bit. We also have this shadow. It's like a triangle funnel shape. Okay, and then the rest slightly shaded. The top here, this shadow is a very gradual transition. So I would even start it here and then work my way down. So very, very lightly work in layers. You don't want to suddenly make something too dark and not be able to erase it. And because today is a dramatic lighting shadow class, feel free to just push with those pencils, push hard so you have a really dark shadow. And don't be afraid to go too dark, actually. My only advice is to go slow and take your time, especially with the dark shadows. You want to layer them up until they're dark enough, but you also don't want to go in too fast. Take your time, step back, enjoy the process. And look for shapes, very subtle shapes within these shadows that'll help you establish the shadows that look a little bit more ambiguous. Okay, now that we're getting towards the bottom half of the face, so underneath the eyebrows, you can start to push a little bit harder. So I'm just going to color this entire section black. So go ahead and you can go in one direction, how many directions, whatever you want. I'm just going to shade it all in. And I guess we can stop a little bit here because we don't know where the shadow is going exactly. Alright, and now we have the shadow done on this side, mostly. Okay, now let's move on to, let's go back to this eye here because we're actually not done. This one on the left. So let's shade in or sketch in the eyebrows. They're quite thick. Or not thick, just tall and wide. Not wide, just tall. And it kind of fades away into the shadows. So we don't need to be too exact. Now let's draw the shadow of the eye. So I start at the top here of the eyebrow. You see this little highlight there. I'm just going to wrap around that flesh a little bit. So now I've created a little curve. So think of it like that. That's just the side of the eye still being lit up by whatever the light source is. Okay, and then everything here on the right side of that shadow edge is just going to be a huge shadow connecting upwards into the corner of the eyebrow. And at its darkest, along that bottom edge there. The connecting between the eyes is this nose shadow. It's just a curved shadow to match with the curve of the nose. Okay, and then next is the shadow or the shadows on the inside of the eye. First, I'm going to just sketch out where the highlight is, so where the white little dot is. Shade in the iris. And then also shade in everything else. So the eye is not white here, it's actually very dark gray. Leaving the center mostly white. So darker around the edges, and it'll phase a little bit in the middle. Okay, and then now we're going to shade the shadow underneath the eye. So this is kind of like a triangle section. There is a little bit of that space left between the eye and then the rest of that shadow. So it actually starts just a little eye bag, like a bean shape. My favorite shape. Okay, I just lightly sketched the outline for that shadow, and I'm just going to start filling it in. And I'm just kind of lightly erasing the edges so it's not as sharp of a shadow as it could be. It is darkest in the corner. So Just make sure you add that. Okay, and then maybe just add a little bit of shadow on the edges here. Add a little bit of that cheek shadow to show a little bit of like a sunken in, tired look. And then let's move on to the rest of the face. So right now I'm just shading that medium shadow here, just along the nose. And when I get to the corner of the nose, I'm going to make it obviously a little bit darker to show this shadow, which doesn't go all the way, kind of just sits there and ends as quick as it came. Just start shading and filling in the rest of the face. At this point, I just shade all of the lower half of the face because I know it's going to be all shadows, either the dark one or the mid-tone, but either way it's going to be dark. So I'm just setting up the foundation for my drawing by doing this. Before we start putting in all the shadows, I'm also going to shade this part of the nose. So notice this strip of the nose is a little bit darker as opposed to this white stuff. It's just a little strip of that mid-tone. Okay, and then bring that shadow from this side over. Fill it in. And then move your way to the bottom of the mouth, or the mouth. So you see this little dip, this alveolar dip. Then now I'm going to shade the mouth. So the top lip, as you can see, is actually the darker one. So starting from the corner that I drew originally, to go up, draw the top of that lip. It won't touch this shadow though, but it will touch the rest of the shadow. So basically I'm just outlining this lighter area. Right, so imagine a line to show the border of that shadow. It'll look something like this. It goes down, up a little bit, and then down again. Okay, and then now shade that. Shade the shadow sitting on here. And then now come wrap around under the lip. And then finally wrapping around that chin. Yeah, so just another tip whenever you're drawing harsh shadows like this, just keep an eye out for the shapes. The shapes will tell you where the shadows will go. So right now I'm just softening the edge here because the chin is not a sharp object. It's quite round and blunt. I'm just darkening the corner of this, or the edge of the face. Now coming to the bottom of the face, or the neck area, we're going to shade that as well. So you can very fuzzily think of this as one huge chunk of shadow, but if I increase the sharpness on it, that's essentially the shape of how you should be shading. So again, if you can't see, just squint, take off your glasses if you're wearing glasses, and it will help you blur out and find the general shapes, or these more abstract and vague areas. So first do a light layer just to establish that. We don't want to go too dark too fast. Okay, and once you're happy with that, you can start darkening it. It is always darkest in these tension spots, so where two parts meet. These little corners, right? Darker in the center. And then as you get closer and closer to the edge of that shadow, lighten the pressure on your pencil. Pull back. And then don't press so hard. And just let the pencil glide across your page. And that is how you get a smoother transition. And then moving back up to the top of the face, we still need these shadows. So these, they're not shadows, they're just midtones, but our paper is white, so we need to shade them in order to let the highlights pop. And these are the highlights. You see these areas of brightness? That's where the highlights are. So it's very shiny. Okay, I'm going to take my pencil and just lightly brush across the temple area. And then shade this area in. And purposely ignoring the white highlights. So if it helps, I can draw the edge so you can see it better. So that's just a very subtle shadow of the skull. The original anatomical structure, skeleton, below all this skin. And then keep coming down. Still about the same darkness. And then there's a highlight again here, but this is very, very soft and there's no edge, but you can think of it as, oh, that's a cheekbone, so I'm going to go around it when I shade. So you see I'm just leaving this area a little bit blank. It's a very, very subtle effect. Now coming to the corner of the face. Now that we're getting closer to the nose, I'm also going to come back and add more of these midtones to the nose, because it seems like I forgot. So the highlight is really just this chunk. The rest of it is a midtone. Now back down to the neck. Let's shade that side of the neck. Okay, so the shadow, it's a little bit sharper on the bottom and it becomes softer on the top. hold on. I'm actually going to just fix the jawline a little bit here. Just a subtle line. Okay, now we're good. Anyways, back down to the neck. There's a thin, very thin shadow on the edge, almost looking like a line. And then a mid-tone shadow to buffer that. Okay, at this point, there are a couple things left to do, and it's just number one, darken the hair. Number two, darken some of the shadows and then also the general tone of the ear. So hair, ear, and then the clothes. And maybe background if we can get to it. But let's darken the hair first. I'm just going to fill in all, you see these little white spaces in between? Right, all these white spaces. I'm gonna fill some of them out, not all of them. Fill them out to make it darker, and then leave some of them to keep the highlights and possibly exaggerate a little bit of the highlights in the hair. If you feel like your pencil is still not dark enough, you can use a 6B. So that's a 6B pencil. The bigger the number, the darker, right? So if it's a B, right now I'm using just a 3B. If I had a 6B or anything higher, then it will help make my drawing darker because the 6B is softer. So the graphite goes on darker. Sharpening my pencil. This way I can better get those little holes and darken the hair. Because the denser the lines are, or the closer the lines are, the less hole you're going to get. And the less holes you get, the darker this area will be. Just darkening the shadow on the forehead here. I'm just cleaning up the edges, fixing up the silhouette. Now I'm just going to darken up the side of the ear here. Just a little bit, so it's not like it feels like it's white. And then of course, if you have time, start sketching or shading out the clothes. You can keep it white, doesn't really matter, but I feel like if you have a black clothing or black area on the bottom, it'll help ground your portrait. So now we're not just talking about the portrait, how to draw a portrait, but also how to make a portrait look good. Especially if the background is lighter than the clothes. This will help your character stand out from the background. So real quickly, I'm just going to go and add a little bit of that shading. No particular way of coloring this in because it's not the focus of the portrait. I don't really care too much about it, but that's why I'm going really quickly. And it's not even fully black, I'm just darkening it. There's also a few textures here and there, but that's just very, very extra. You don't need to add this, but if you feel like you want it to be more realistic, keep an eye out for the skin textures and also like any moles. Do they have freckles? You don't write that little dot. Just to make this look like a real person, these are just some things that you can do by paying attention to their unique features. All right, and we are done. Thank you so much for coming today, and I will see you again next week. I'll keep this up a little bit for you guys to look at. But otherwise, thank you so much, and take care.